Hi, welcome back. In this video, we will program a file destroyer. So that's an app which is useful if you have sensitive files in your computer which you really want to permanently delete. And it's not simply about deleting, but it's about destroying them by overwriting them. Now, if you have followed the course, we did have a lecture where we wrote a script without a graphical user interface, so it's just a script which runs on the command line. So this script, what it did is you specified a folder in that script. For example, destination is a folder in here which may contain some files, and so the script then iterates over that path object. So for path in that directory, it filters all the CSV files, and then it opens each of that path, file path, and then it overrides an empty byte string into that file. So basically, each file will be overwritten with some empty content, and that makes the file hard to recover if somebody else gets your computer and they try to recover your hard disk previous content. Because the file will be overwritten by Python. And then finally we delete that overwritten file. So first we overwrite it and then we delete it. This is the script that does this, but now we want to take this one step further and build a graphical user interface. So this is what we will build in this video, and it has this description here. Select the files you want to destroy, and it warns the user that the files will be permanently deleted. And then it has these two buttons: open files, which shows you a file dialog. So here you can select multiple files that you want to delete, for example these three, open them, and the program, the GUI, will display the paths of those files in here. And then you can say destroy files, and this destruction successful string shows up in here, and the files will disappear from that folder. So they will be overwritten by Python and then deleted. So let's write this program. We will use PyQt6, so if you haven't installed it, please do so with PyQt6 pip install PyQt6. And then I'm going to use this code. So we did write this code previously, and this creates an application instance. It creates a window instance as well, which is where all the widgets will be added: the buttons, the labels, the text, whatever you add to your main window of your GUI. So we set a title for the window. We also need a layout, which is equal to QV box layout, and you need to import that in here, QV box layout. So we set then that layout and use parentheses here as well, and then we set that layout as the main layout of the window. We show the window and then we execute the app instance so that it generates our application. So currently this is how our window looks like. It has this title, and we're ready to add widgets now. So we said that first we're going to have here on top a label. So let's add a label. For that we need QLabel, the QLabel widget. Let's say description is equal to QLabel, and then we add some info here, which goes inside quotes. So it's a string. I'm using single quotes here, and I'm going to paste the string which I wrote previously. So what this is select the files you want to destroy. I'm telling the user what the app is about and how they can use it, and then the files will be permanently deleted, and permanently is in red font. So you can use these HTML tags as you see in here So red is in double quotes. That's why I use single quotes for this, since I was using double quotes inside the string. Once you have created the label object, then you want to add the label to layout. So layout.addWidget and description is the label, and let's see what we have. Yeah, so that's the label and permanently is in red color. So as we develop this program, I'm going to introduce you to advanced concepts of PyQt, such as this styling of text in here. And we have more and more concepts to discover in this video. So let's add more widgets. What's next? Well, it has to be a button. So let's say open btn is equal to q. Well, we need to import the button. So let's not have that line infinitely long and have another import statement here from PyQt6.qt widgets import q push button. Q push button goes there, and the title of the button will be open files. Add that button to layout using add widget open button. Test it. Yeah, it's there. Now, if you want to add a tooltip option feature to this button, you can do so. Because currently, as you see, when I hover the mouse over the button, I don't see any info popping up. So if you want to have that, then you want to refer to the variable associated to your button object and then say set tooltip. And you can use the same string, open files, and run. So if I hover the mouse button here, you see this small prompt open file. This could be useful especially when you have icons instead of buttons with text. So icons don't have labels, and it becomes very crucial to have these pop-ups so that the user can see what these icons are about. However, this is not an icon, it's just a button with plain text. So perhaps this is not necessary in this case, but it's just there so that you know that this exists. And do you want to make the button maybe smaller? Well, you can do that by referring again to the button and then use set fixed width. So with that, let's say 60 and run. So it's too small, perhaps 100. So this, run. Now it looks better, so try to experiment with other sizes. And let's also align the button to be at the center of the window. For that, you can use alignment equal to, so alignment inside the add widget method. That will be equal to qt.alignment. And qt is something that needs to be imported from PyQt6.qt core import qt. So alignment flag and dot align center property. Run, and the button is at the center now. Right, so what does this button do? Let's connect it to a slot, which will be a function that we will write on top here. So to connect the button, you should refer to the button. So we're talking about doing something when the button is clicked. So open button.clicked, then we connect it to a function. So when the button is clicked, this function now will be called. Let's name this function open files and then define that function open files in here. And so what should the app do when we press the open files button? When the user presses that button, well, the app should open a dialog box that allows the user to select files on their file system on their operating system. So for that, we need something called QFile dialog, and you need to import that in here, and then create that object instance. So for that, I'm going to say file names and just an underscore. So we have two variables here, and these two variables are equal to QFile dialog. I'm having two variables because this returns two objects. The first object is a list of file names. So if the user selects 3 files, then a list will be generated containing the absolute paths of all those files, of each of those files. And then we have this, which is some extra information about the dialog action, which we don't need. So we just leave it as an underscore, which is just a variable, but it's just a throwaway variable. So QFile dialog, actually we need to call the get open file names of that class. The first argument will be the window. The window is the variable that contains the QWidget object. And then you want to specify a label for the dialog window. Let's say select files. And that's it. Now, just to show you what file names is, I'm going to print it out on the terminal. And then I'll select some files now through the GUI. But first, make sure you have some sample files that you want to destroy. So open your file explorer, perhaps put some sample files which you don't need there. So I'm putting one here, one file, and I'm going to just duplicate it, copy and paste it. Control V, make several copies. So you have some files to play around with. And then run the code and open files. The dialog will appear. Go to the folder where you have those files, those sample files, and select a couple of them. Open. And now, when you press the open button on the terminal, I got a list printed out. So the list has 3 items, and each item is the absolute path to each of those files that we selected in the dialog box. So that gives us now the possibility to manipulate and delete those files. So for that, I'm going to write here a loop for file name in file names. And I prefer to use the path library. So from path lib, it's a standard library, you don't need to install it. Import path. So I'm going to convert each file name into a path object. A path is a specialized object in Python which makes dealing with files more efficient. So path is equal to path, that class, and then we provide file name here. That file name, which in the first loop will be that first string. So file name is just a string, and file name goes inside path and it becomes a path object now, not a string. So and then we say with open path, that current path object, we open it as a write binary and we say as file. So file now is an open file in Python. It's a specific file object. So we have a string in file name, we have a path object in path, and we have a file object in file. And this file we can write a byte string. So the file is open now and we can modify it with Python. So what we do is write a byte string there, and that will overwrite whatever content the file has inside. So that's like modifying the file and the previous content is just lost. So that's a very safe deletion of your sensitive files. So with that, you write the file, so you modify it. Then if you want to delete the overwritten file, you can do so by using First you have to unindent, so the file will be saved on disk at that point, and then if you want you can say path.unlink to delete the file. The unlink method will delete that path, so the file associated with that path object. So let me try to run the code. And then click on Open Files, go to the Files directory where I have these files. I'm selecting A2, 3, and 4 and press on Open. So with that, if I go to this directory now, I see that files 2, 3, and 4 are gone. So they are overwritten and then deleted. But this is not the best user interface because I think we're missing a button here. So if you run the program again, the best user experience is that the user first should open the files. So they select the files they want to delete, and then here should be another button that should say something like destroy the files, and that button should execute this part of the code, not the open files button. So what we need is another button under the open button. So let's say destroy button btn is equal to q push button, and let's name this destroy files. Let's set a width for that as well and put it at the center here, and then finally make sure you change these from open button to destroy button, and also here destroy button. And then finally you refer to destroy button to clicked to connect, and we want to connect that to another function. Let's say destroy files. This is a new function we need to write somewhere in here. Define destroy files. And then this code is transferred to this function, so that this code executes when the user presses that destroy button. But we have a problem here. File names is a variable defined inside this function, and that makes that variable local. So it only has a scope inside this function. It will not be recognized outside of that function unless we declare that as a global variable. Now, using global, so making variable global in Python is not the best practice, and this could cause some issues later on when you expand your program, unless you are very careful with what you're doing, and you can avoid those problems. But the best practice to avoid using global variables is to use object-oriented programming. So to structure your programs using classes. And you can do that with PyQt. So you can use classes and you can write the same program using classes and avoid using globals. Because inside that class, you can use instance variables instead of global variables, and that would solve the issue with not having to use global variables. So that's something you should know about using global. With that in mind, let's keep our current structure without going to object-oriented programming. So this will do the job just fine. So by doing global file names, that means the file names can be accessed now from other parts of the code and not only from inside this function. Yeah, so let's try to run the code again. Run main. Now we have this button here. So first we want to open files. Let's select 5 and 6. Open. Press on destroy and check if files are still there or not. Yeah, so they are destroyed. 5 and 6. We can do more, by adding a label under the last button here so that we let the user know what's going on. So what I'll do is I'll go down here and add a message variable which is equal to QLabel. Currently this will be empty, and I'll add this to the layout, so layout.addWidget message. And then in here, once the user opens the file, instead of printing out the file names on the terminal, I want to print them out on that label. So message.set text, and then you want to enter file names, not file names, because file names is currently, it's a list which looks something like that, A, B, and C, and so on. So a list cannot be accepted by the setText method. So what we want to do instead is we want to say join, so a string.join file names. And what do we want to join them with? You can say a dash, for example, and you'll get something like that, A-B. Or you can do better and say \, which creates a break line. Well, here on the terminal, it doesn't look like a break line, but if you print it out on a label widget or use a print function here, then you will see that, it will be a break line, so \n. Now you see that A is one line, and then we have the break line which connects the two. So \n is converted into a break line when you use a print function or when you print it out on a label. So that means we should say \n dot join, so join all the elements of file names using that separator. And then in here we exit the loop, so in this place in here, in the same indentation label with the for loop, and then say message dot set text destruction successful, and run. So open files and select a few files, 7, 8, 9, using the shift. And so these are the files that were selected. And you press on destroy files and you have that label destruction successful. You can put the label more on the center by using alignment is equal to qt.alignment flag.align center, and that should solve the issue. So open files, and now the label is at the center. So that concludes this video. Thanks a lot for following, and see you in the next videos.